GLP-1 medication like Ozempic and Zepbound are the most effective weight loss tool we've ever had, and yet most people are using them wrong. That's why they lose muscles, which doesn't look great and is unhealthy. They hit plateaus after a few months and actually even regain their weight when they get off the medication or try to dose them down. And the answer is not more or different GLP-1 medication. It is all about nutrition. And today I want to show you 4 things you can do if you are on GLP that will make your results actually sustain and work for you. Let's start with what's actually going wrong for most people, starting with your loss of muscles. Study shows that up to 40% of the weight loss on GLP-1 is actually coming from muscles and not fat. Why is that? Of course, on GLP-1, you reduce your appetite, you eat less, but that doesn't mean that your body doesn't need the same amount of protein. And so people dramatically drop how many grams of protein they eat a day. For example, when people need 150 grams of proteins, they end up eating only 60. Why does that matter? It's because when you don't eat enough protein, your body starts breaking your muscle in order to use energy. And as a result, you get more tired. And then you also don't look as well because you have less muscle. And worse, when you try to dose off the medication and you start eating more, your metabolism has gone down because you have lost muscle, and as a result you gain weight even more quicker, and that's this vicious cycle. The second problem we regularly see is plateau, namely you start dropping a lot of weight in the first few months and then you don't see as much weight loss happening anymore. And there's probably 2 reasons for that. The first is as you lose weight, your body burns less calories, and as a result, you slow down in terms of weight loss. But the second reason, which is even more important, is that in fact, people eat less calories than they used to. That's true, but they're not necessarily eating the right sort of calories. They end up eating things that are quite calorie dense and don't keep them full. Think, oh, I'll have a pasta with some oil, a handful of nuts and things like that. What happens is actually that's still a lot of calories compared to what you need in terms of losing weight. And second, you end up being very hungry quite a bit later, and as a result, you end up kind of eating more overall in the day. And there is an answer to that, which we'll get to in a second, which is to eat more protein and fiber that actually keep you full for less calories. But just to complete first the third problem, which is that people that are only relying on GLP don't create the right habit to sustain their results. They do not know how many proteins they need to eat in order to stay full, or they haven't identified tactics that will work for them, like go-to meals or other things, in order to stay within a calorie range. And then what happens is, what the studies show is that most people, when they dose off the GLP-1 or actually get off them, end up regaining most of their weight in 18 months. If you've experienced some of those problems, I'd love you to drop us a comment that explains what have you faced, and I'd love to then respond to you or others to share their experiences that may help as well. But here's the good news. If you decide to go on GLP, it gives you a window whereby you start losing weight, and then during that period, making lifestyle changes is easier than ever before. However, most people don't use that opportunity. They just continue eat less and rely on that. But those who do use that window to change their behavior by, for example, changing their nutrition, end up using GLP from a position of strength, which means what? Is that they can, for example, start dosing down a little bit and rely less on GLP-1 for appetite suppression and other things. And those who don't are the ones that remain dependent on it and see the problems that we've discussed so far. So what exactly should you do? 4 things. First, hit your protein target every day. Most people need between 0.8 grams to 1 grams of proteins per pound of weight. If you weigh 200 pounds, you need between 160 and 200 grams of protein per day. Why do you need it? For 3 reasons. First, protein target is what keeps your muscles growing. Second, protein is the most important food to keep you full because it sends a signal to your brain that it had enough. And third, protein helps break plateaus. because you stay full, you are unlikely to go for a second round of meal during the day, which is what usually triggers those plateaus we've been talking about. Now, most people have heard the fact that they need to eat protein, but the reality is that they're nowhere near their targets, and that's more a question of tactics and protocols of how to make it work in practice, which I turn to next. The second fix, therefore, is to hit your protein target. There's no use knowing that you need to hit 150 grams if you don't have a system to get there. Now, in terms of how to get there, it's quite different for different people because we all lead a very different life, and the tactics that work for one may not work for others. I want to give you some examples to inspire you and develop your own tactic. The first one that works for most people is to actually log your meals. Because by logging your meals, you can start realizing how far off you are on each one of the meals. And so gradually you can learn to add them and start seeing that it works best. The good news is that there's many apps today where you can just snap a picture and find out where are you roughly put. It doesn't have to be perfect. The second is to, for example, eat protein first in your meal. If you start off with the chicken, you are kind of almost guaranteed to have enough and be mindful about it. And then you can go on to the rest of your vegetables and other parts of your plate. The third one is to actually not leave it to chance and have a playbook of 5 to 10 go-to protein-rich meals that you know you can rely on when you don't have another option. So for example, you may know that you want apples and the protein shakes in the morning and that hits your protein targets for breakfast. The fourth approach could be for you to adapt your environment to stock up on proteins everywhere. Make sure your fridge has cottage cheese and yogurt, your pantry has eggs and maybe some dried meat, and consider and visualize your lunches and dinners, because these are the core parts where you need to make sure you've got chicken and potentially fish ready available for those meals, thereby not leaving it to chance, which is the biggest risk. The third fix is about doing some strength training. Now, nutrition will do most of the heavy lifting, and we've covered that, but strength training, namely using your body weight or weights to lift them, is essential to preserve your lean mass. What it effectively does is that when you lift weights, you're kind of telling your body, hey, don't break those muscles down, I actually need them to lift my weight, in simple terms. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to live your week at the gym. You can even start once a week and gradually make your way to 2 or 3 times a week. The key, if you do it, is to add progression in terms of the number of repetitions you do, and the weight you lift needs to gradually go up over time as your body adapts. Now, there's many ways to go about it. There's many apps. You can take a personal trainer. There's a lot of YouTube videos that you can use and other means to just get started, because at the beginning, any form of strength training activity you will do will build your lean mass. A fourth fix you could do is to get some form of support, because putting all of this together, namely hitting your protein targets per meal, adding physical activity, can be quite overwhelming. And in fact, working with a group or a coach could help you break it down into achievable goals where you gradually add routines and have someone to ask questions to and to be accountable for. Most people find that this approach is much more likely to sustain in results and for people to maintain them over time. So here's the bottom line. GLP-1 medication can work, especially if you've got a lot of weight to lose, but it's really a starting point and a window, not something to try by itself. The 4 things we've been discussing about is: number 1, hitting your protein targets. Number 2, develop techniques to make sure you actually hit them, like logging meals, etc. Third, add some strength training to build and maintain your muscle mass. And finally, add support and accountability from someone or a group that can help you make sure you actually stick to the routines you're trying to do. If you do these things, then you'll be able to sustain your results and use these drugs from a position of strength, eventually maybe microdose or even get off them. And that's the key to success when you consider using GLP-1.